The story of Moses and his exclusion from the Promised Land is one of the most profound and thought-provoking narratives in the Bible, offering timeless lessons on faith, obedience, humility, and the consequences of disobedience. Moses, one of the most revered figures in biblical history, was chosen by God to lead the Israelites out of Egyptian slavery and guide them through the wilderness toward the Promised Land. Throughout his life, Moses demonstrated remarkable courage, unwavering faith, and a deep connection with God. He witnessed and facilitated countless miracles, including the parting of the Red Sea, the provision of manna, and the giving of the Ten Commandments. Yet even a leader as faithful and dedicated as Moses was not immune to human weaknesses. His journey reveals both the heights of spiritual leadership and the weight of its responsibilities. The moment of his disobedience at Meribah stands as a pivotal event, not only in his life but in the spiritual narrative of the Israelites. The event at Meribah, recorded in Numbers 20, occurred during a particularly trying time for Moses and the Israelites. As they wandered through the wilderness, the people faced a severe lack of water, which led to bitter complaints and rebellion. Despite witnessing God's miraculous provision time and again, the Israelites displayed a striking lack of faith and gratitude, grumbling against Moses and Aaron. They questioned why they had been led out of Egypt, lamenting the hardships of the wilderness and longing for the comforts of their former captivity. Frustrated and overwhelmed by their continued lack of trust, Moses and Aaron sought God's guidance. God provided a clear and specific instruction. Moses was to take his staff, gather the people, and speak to a rock, which would then miraculously produce water to quench the people's thirst. This moment was intended to be a demonstration of God's holiness and power, reaffirming his faithfulness to provide for his people. However, Moses allowed his emotions to override his obedience. In his frustration with the people's rebellion, he deviated from God's command. Rather than speaking to the rock as instructed, he struck it twice with his staff and addressed the Israelites in anger, saying, "Listen, you rebels, must we bring you water out of this rock?" While water flowed abundantly from the rock, meeting the people's immediate needs, this act of disobedience carried significant spiritual consequences. God rebuked Moses and Aaron, declaring, "Because you did not trust in me enough to honor me as holy in the sight of the Israelites, you will not bring this community into the land I give them." Numbers 20:12. This marked a turning point in Moses' journey as he was barred from leading the Israelites into the Promised Land, a place he had spent decades guiding them toward. The gravity of Moses' actions lies in several key aspects. First, his decision to strike the rock instead of speaking to it reflected a lapse in faith and patience. Known for his humility and steadfastness, Moses allowed frustration to dictate his behavior, acting impulsively rather than trusting fully in God's plan. Second, his actions represented direct disobedience to God's specific command. While the difference between speaking and striking might seem minor, it symbolized a deeper issue of failing to honor God's holiness and authority. Third, Moses misrepresented God's nature to the Israelites. By striking the rock and implying that he and Aaron were the source of the miracle, Moses shifted the focus away from God's provision and onto himself. This act of self-glorification undermined the intended purpose of the miracle, to demonstrate God's power, holiness, and care for his people. The symbolism of the rock further deepens the significance of this event. In Exodus 17, God had previously instructed Moses to strike a rock to produce water, symbolizing God's provision in the midst of the Israelites' struggles. In the New Testament, the Apostle Paul identifies this rock as a representation of Christ, writing, "They drank from the spiritual rock that accompanied them, and that rock was Christ." 1 Corinthians 10:4. Striking the rock a second time not only disobeyed God's direct command, but also disrupted the profound spiritual symbolism. Christ's sacrifice was a once-for-all act, and speaking to the rock would have reflected faith in God's provision and the sufficiency of his grace. By striking the rock, Moses inadvertently distorted this imagery, suggesting a need for repeated action rather than trust in God's ultimate plan. The consequences of Moses' disobedience highlight the immense responsibility borne by spiritual leaders. As a mediator between God and the Israelites, Moses was called to model unwavering trust and obedience, serving as an example of faithfulness. His actions at Meribah, however, suggested doubt and an attempt to assert control over the situation. a role that belongs to God alone. This moment serves as a cautionary tale for leaders and believers alike, emphasizing the importance of humility, obedience, and reliance on God. Leaders are held to a higher standard because their actions not only impact their own spiritual journey, but also influence the faith and understanding of those they guide. When leaders fail to honor God's commands or misrepresent His character, the consequences can ripple through the community, undermining trust and spiritual growth. Yet the story of Moses is not solely one of failure. It is also a testament to God's grace and redemptive plan. Although Moses was denied entry into the Promised Land, he was not abandoned by God. In Deuteronomy 34, we read that God allowed Moses to ascend Mount Nebo, where he was granted a vision of the Promised Land, a powerful reminder of God's faithfulness and the fulfillment of His promises. Furthermore, Moses' ultimate reward was not earthly, but eternal. In the New Testament, he appears alongside Elijah during the transfiguration of Jesus, symbolizing his inclusion in God's greater plan of redemption. This moment affirms that despite his human imperfections, Moses remained a pivotal figure in God's story, representing the law and foreshadowing the grace to come through Christ. The story of Moses and his exclusion from the Promised Land challenges us to reflect on our own walk with God. It calls us to examine how we respond to His instructions, especially in moments of frustration or doubt. Are we quick to trust Him fully, or do we allow our emotions and pride to lead us astray? Do our actions and words glorify God and reflect His holiness, or do they distort His character? This narrative also offers hope, reminding us that God's grace is greater than our failures. While Moses' disobedience had serious consequences, it did not negate the profound impact of his leadership or his place in God's eternal plan. His story inspires us to remain faithful, obedient, and humble, trusting that God's purposes are perfect and His promises are eternal. Whether in moments of triumph or trial, let us strive to honor God in all that we do, knowing that He sees the bigger picture of our lives and works all things for His glory and our ultimate good. Thank you for watching. If this story inspired you, don't forget to like, comment, and share. Subscribe our channel, All the Great Stuff, for more uplifting content.